Awesome. We are live. So, what the hell's up with empathy in grad school? Welcome to Ask Me, I'm a Scientist. My name is Susanna Harris, and each week or each episode, I bring on a different expert in totally different fields to just ask them questions. And I encourage you, because this is a live chat, to go ahead and ask the questions along with me. So, this ranges from all different kinds of science, and today we're going to be focusing more on social science, which I am super excited about. Before I introduce our guest, I just want to remind you to go ahead and like and subscribe. Every time I do that the wrong way, like and subscribe so it tells me to keep doing more videos. You can go ahead and follow me. It's a good way to actually keep up with what's ever going on, and I would say it's behind the scenes, but it's mostly just me bullshitting with my dogs. So anyway, back to the episode. I'm so excited because we have Liesl Krause, who is a PhD student at Purdue Polytechnic and is also a doctoral fellow there at Purdue University. And Liesl works on something kind of interesting. We'll dig into this, but what she's working on is comparing biologic measures of empathy compared to self-reported empathy using all of this different kind of data and strategies. So something that maybe most of us don't think about, something that's like really technical that we can really measure, but it's quite fascinating. So with that, I would like to introduce Liesl Krause. Hey Liesl, how's it going?
Hey, good. How are
I
you?
am doing really well. It's super fun to be here, and I'm also very biased. I think that I should let people know you are on the PhD balance team. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you're working on, even where you are right now?
Yeah, definitely will. So I am social distancing at home right now. I'm at Purdue University, so I'm in West Lafayette. Um, so I got two engineering degrees before I started working in this more social space. One from Villanova in electrical engineering, and one in biomedical engineering here at Purdue University. And through the Purdue University biomed degree, I kind of realized that I am not the kind of person that wants to sit alone and do really technical research in the lab all day. I am way too social of a person for that. And I also realized that a lot of the research that I was interested in was actually how to bring science to other people. So I went into STEM education as my PhD program. And through that, I found that a lot of PhD students and master's students have difficulties with mental health. And so that's kind of what I'm focusing on now with this whole empathy thing.
Yeah, I mean, again, a little biased. I think that grad student mental health is so cool, and so you're actually getting a degree in kind of education and understanding how grad students work. I have to be honest, I didn't even before we met or virtually met, I didn't know that that was an option. How did you even find out about that field?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So in high school, I was part of this program called Project Lead the Way, which is a self-contained curriculum that people in different school programs can buy. There's other ones. Engineering by Design is another big one. But in Project Lead the Way, my teacher was now Dr. Greg Strimmel, and when I came out here for my master's program, he came out here to become a faculty member at the Purdue Polytechnic Technology, Leadership, and Innovation program. And part of one of the degree programs there is called Engineering Technology Teacher Education. So it's an education program, but specifically for tech ed teachers. So if you remember shop classes or if your school had an automotive program, those are the teachers that they're preparing. And so he reached out to me. He wanted to do more with getting women involved in engineering, and he knew that I would be kind of a good person on the engineering side to take care of that. So he's the one that really got me super interested in this degree program. And because it is a new and evolving field, you can kind of take it in multiple directions. And so that's kind of what I've done here is I've said, look, I know that you guys are all really interested in the K through 12 space. And that's awesome. But I'm also super interested in the undergraduate and graduate space because we need a lot of help as people.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's
yeah.
really cool. And it does lead us really well into what you actually study. Um, let's see. I the first thing that came up to me when you sent me your, your little bio was something called the empathy quotient. What is the empathy quotient? It seems, quotient, I think of math, and that's pretty much all I got.
Yeah, so the empathy quotient is a self-reporting survey. It's 60 questions. 40 of them actually contribute to your score or your empathy score. And those questions are determining what kind of empathy you have for other people, just at a general level. So there's like one question on there that asks you, like, did you cut up worms as a small child just to see what would happen? And the closer that
Okay,
you
wait, wait, wait,
are
wait, wait.
to,
I don't think that it took me a second because I was like, yeah, you cut up. I'm sorry. This is a real question in this test. Do you cut up worms?
yeah, yeah. So this is an actual question, and it's the one that I always get laughs about because people are like, hold up a second,
Yeah.
like, who didn't cut up worms, or like, why did somebody cut up worms? They're very strange questions, but they're designed that way because it's the same kind of thing when you take other surveys. Like, they just wear you down with the questions to really get at the heart of what they're asking.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Anyway, continue. Sorry, I was
yeah,
just like, oh yeah, sure. So wait, I'm sorry. Worms, right? Okay, I haven't taken that survey.
yeah,
Now, actually,
yeah.
I'll put it in the links. Is there a way for people to take this survey, or is there like a free version online or anything like it?
Yeah, I can find that after this chat and get
Sweet.
that over to you to put in the
Yeah.
comments.
Okay, we will do that for sure. Anyway, back to the
Yeah,
survey
yeah.
itself.
Yeah, so with the survey itself, you take the survey, and so with the worm question, if you strongly disagree and you say, I never wanted to cut up a worm, that indicates that you are more empathetic because you probably cared a little bit more about the worm. So you get like a point or 2 points for being empathy or empathetic. Um, and there's other questions where if you agree, you get a point or 2 points or whatever that question calls for. So at the end, you get a total out of 80. And the closer you are to 80, the more empathetic you are. And so the average for like somebody who doesn't have any sort of social affective disorder or autism, um, people typically earn around a 40 to 45 points for empathy. So that's what we would consider like an ideal empathy
Okay,
person.
ideal empathy person. Is there a problem with?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to hold that one. But first, okay, we've been saying empathy, and I kind of have a vague feeling. I know it's something that's kind of good. It's kind of related to caring. What is defined as empathy?
Sure. So there's a lot of definitions for empathy out there, but the one that I go off of is it's your ability to relate to other people's emotions, and not just in that way that like you're like, oh, that person is sad or that person is angry, but the ability where you can almost take on that feeling yourself and understand what they're going through. So an empathetic person might see somebody crying and understand that they're sad and then also feel sad for that
Okay.
person. And it doesn't mean that like you reach the same levels of emotion as that other person, but you can sit there and you can help them through that sadness.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that relates to the other question that popped into my mind, which is, can you be too empathetic? I do have friends who define themselves as like an empath, and I think what they mean by that is that if they have those really strong mirror feelings towards people, are there any downsides to being extremely empathetic?
So there's like no literature out there right now about like being too empathetic. And I've actually talked to my therapist about this because I feel like I'm too empathetic of a person sometimes. But often when people describe themselves as an empath or being too empathetic, actually what they're recognizing is something in the other person's emotions triggers something within yourself. So it becomes a point where like you're not being empathetic anymore. More something about the other person's emotions has triggered feelings in you, and so now you're just emoting at a high level.
So cool.
So that's kind of what I think about. There are books out there in science fiction that are pretty interesting where they talk about being hyper empathetic, to the point of like, if somebody bleeds, you bleed kind of a thing. And so I think that's an interesting thing to explore, but there's no real evidence of that happening in humans out here today.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's stuff of like sympathy pains, right? But
Hmm.
it is interesting, and even if you have a friend who gets sick or a loved one who's sick, you can end up feeling kind of sick. But that question of I love what you're pointing out there of it actually triggering something in you. It's not that you're feeling their feelings, but it's, you're having your own emotional response probably to their emotions.
Exactly.
Um, so before I like just take over this entire conversation, I want to make sure I want to make sure that we can get to some of the questions that we've been getting asked. And again, these are before these live chats. I always put up something in Instagram or on Twitter so that you can ask the questions. And we've got a couple really good ones that I don't know. I love our community. Okay. So we've got one from Teresa Ambrosio. Says how to approach people and ask questions about their struggle. I think this also brings us into that point of how this relates to academia, right? We both work a little bit in this space of supporting other students, this kind of peer support, this awareness. What do you, with these sort of empathy things of being empathic, understanding your boundaries, understanding your your certain tendencies, or understanding others, are there ways that we can be better at using our empathy? That might be a little bit off the wall.
No, I think that's a really great question. So I think in terms of using our empathy, it has to do with not being a passive observer when you see that somebody is struggling. I think sometimes because academia is kind of a professional space in a lot of ways, if we see somebody struggling, or even, I flat out cried in lab before, and I'm not ashamed to say that, but people don't acknowledge that. They move past it and they think, oh, they don't want to be bothered with it. Um, don't do that. Lean into that empathy that you're feeling and that discomfort that you're feeling for that person, and just ask them, like, hey, is everything okay? Would you like to chat? Don't push anybody to have to talk to about something that they're not willing to talk about, but just being that supportive person, and letting people know that you're there for them, I think is really big. Um, and I think, in terms of asking somebody directly if they need help is a really good way to make them feel seen as a person. Um, and that can even just go a long way into making sure that somebody who is struggling can find the help that they need.
Sounds like a lot of self-awareness, and I like that question from Teresa of being, how can I be better at asking people questions? So and going back to the topic of your thesis, which is, okay, so there's biological something and the quotient and self-reporting. So what I gathered from this is sort of, how are people, I don't know. This is probably super biased, but I sort of saw this and was like, oh, it's sort of how are people bad at evaluating their own empathy? But I don't know.
Yeah, in a way it is, because I think that a lot of people want to say that they are very empathetic people.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm finding is, like, yeah, on the whole, like, we're empathetic people. So what I'm doing right now is I have a pilot study where I'm taking couples who we know are empathetically linked, as long as they've been together for more than a year. And I'm having them do my biologic measure, which we can talk about in more depth later, but it's skin conductivity, which means
Whoa.
that when you feel an emotion, your skin starts to sweat a little bit more, and so your skin conductivity goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that I'm working off of is, if you elicit an emotion in person A, if there's an empathetic reaction in person B, the spikes will happen at about the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done this now with couples and control groups. Control groups, their spikes like do not match up,
Huh.
but their empathy quotients are like within average. So according to the empathy quotient, they're really empathetic people. But when they're asked to try and empathize with each other in my study, they can't do it.
So sort of
Um,
like logically, maybe they're empathetic or they know the basic human rules of being nice to each other, that kind of golden rule. But biologically, they don't have those cues to protect each other. And I know that there's lots of animals that show these altruistic traits where they'll help each other even if it's not their direct bloodline. I think bats are a really good example of this, that they'll feed other babies. And it kind of makes sense though, right? You wouldn't want to be walking down the street and any person who's on their phone yelling at it or crying or even like super happy that's suddenly you're keyed into them. What does this tell you about kind of people in general, or what's the major question you're asking?
Yeah, so the major question I'm asking eventually is, so what does this empathy look like between advisors and their graduate students? Because I think kind of anecdotally, we know that graduate students and their advisors don't always get along. And it's often when those relationships aren't working that we have some sort of issue for the graduate student, especially, right? So an advisor might be saying, I'm a really empathetic person. I understand what you're feeling. But when you're sitting face to face with your graduate student, are you actually listening to them and understanding what they're saying to you? And I don't think that that's always true. I think we're really good at it when it comes to romantic relationships or friendships, but I don't think that we're necessarily always good at it when it comes to professional relationships.
Yeah, and I feel like academia is a very strange place in terms of it's sort of, and everyone has their different opinions, but and it's not the same for everyone. It's totally different for everyone. But in some cases, your advisor is essentially just a boss, very hands off. You meet with them once a month, and they are looking for productivity, and it's get in, get out, get done, make them data. Other people have like the complete opposite end, is that people have a weird parental relationship with their advisor. There's jokes about when you're finding a lab, it's sort of like dating. There's these ideas of sort of like a mommy complex with certain people. You're looking for that huge validation that you can't find within yourself. Why does the empathy part matter? Should this be something that we care about in a professional setting, or should this be something that we just say, get your empathy, get your understanding somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a question that I get asked a lot, especially from advisors who are concerned that I'm asking them to take on a therapist type role or that I'm asking them to take on that kind of parental role.
Okay,
And I'm like,
I have to interrupt you there. I just love the fact that to some people, the idea of being empathetic, of trying to understand another person's feelings, is being a therapist, which tells me two things. One, they've never seen a therapist, because that's the opposite of what a therapist should do. Your therapist should not be like, they should be trying to understand your emotions, but that's, you're not, they're guiding things. They're not just sitting there emoting with you. And the other thing, like, why, oh gosh, like, shouldn't people want the ones that they work with to at least not feel horrible? I don't know. Anyway, okay,
yeah,
sorry. Like,
yeah,
ooh,
no, but exactly. Like, I don't want your advisor to be your therapist.
oh,
I don't think that's a great idea. I don't want your advisor to be your parental figure, unless that kind of relationship works for you. Um, I want your advisor to hear you when you say you're having a problem and provide support in the manner that they can.
nice.
Um, I don't think that that is necessarily always happening right now. And I think it's because there's that listening component, that active listening component that's really crucial to empathy, that's not happening or is breaking down somehow. And so that's the key part that I'm focused on.
Mm. I just, people who can see the video are going to be like, why did she just get on our phone and start texting? But I literally just wrote down exactly what you said, because I love this so much. You said, I want your advisor to hear you when you are having a problem, and I want them to advise you when they can. And that I, that's the point, right? It's not a question of, is this person going to be your overall, you know, Gandalf is the first thing that came to mind. But he swoops in and is like, we're gonna go do a thing. You don't have a choice. I'm gonna take care of you the whole way, and literally, sacrifice everything for your success. And then when you need me, I'll be right back. Right? Like,
Right.
but that idea of when they can help you, to try to understand those things. And I'm guessing that, this has to relate to productivity in some ways.
It definitely does. There's a literature out there that talks about when you feel supported, you're more productive. Um, and when you're like not getting the support system that you need, of course nothing's going to get done. Like you can't sit there and be a one person like pickaxe trying to get through a mountain. That's not going to work. But when your advisor can provide you with like, a team of other pickaxers or, a stick of dynamite to get through that mountain,
Yeah.
it's going to make everything so much easier and you're going to get through the mountain so much faster.
Yeah, I love that analogy. So we've got Nicole here in the chat. Hey, Nicole, asking, do you think some advisors are more empathetic towards only some of their students? And why do you think this might be? So, I mean, I, wow, it's an unprofessional show. So I will just say in general, I have seen this happen with different advisors where someone will have a situation and that advisor will bend over backwards to try to, make them comfortable or make them feel supported. And other people, it's sort of like, get it together. Life is hard. But have you in your research yet seen anything? Are you looking at one advisor to one student? Like kind of what is your study setup?
Yeah, so I'm going to be looking at one advisor, one student scenarios, simply because this is the first time that this kind of study has been done. And so adding like too many variables in there is going to complicate things.
Mm-hmm.
But anecdotally, and I think it's supported in other types of mentorship research, advisors do tend to favor certain students over other students when it comes to empathy and support. And there can be a lot of reasons for that. It could be a racial thing, it could be a gender thing, it could be a sexuality thing. It could even be an age thing. I know some advisors might feel that somebody coming in right out of undergraduate degrees may not either may not need as much support or needs way more support than somebody who's returning to graduate school or already has a master's degree or something along those lines. And there's a lot of literature coming out right now about male advisors to female advisees. And that can be a really big issue in a lot of different ways. One that's happening right now is male advisors may feel that they cannot support female graduate students in the way that they would a male graduate student for fear of like getting in trouble for sexual harassment. Which there's other bigger problems there that we won't get into right now, I don't think. But
yeah, that's a 2-hour rant.
Yeah, exactly. There's whole books on it, but I think that can definitely be a contributing factor.
Yeah, and there's been so many things both ways, right? As far as self-identity with an advisor or an advisee, that you're going to feel more compassionate towards that person, more connected. And it sounds like, if you're, is it true that there's some relationship between like the connectedness with somebody and how empathetic you feel towards them?
Yeah, the more connected you feel to somebody, the more empathy you feel there. That's why I study couples as my pilot study, because they should be very well connected if they're dating or married or whatever. So there should be more empathy there. And that's partially because you actually have these things called mirror neurons. And
so weird. This topic is so weird.
Oh, yeah. It's super strange. Mirror neurons are something that come up a lot in acting, between like acting coworkers and stuff like that, too. It branches a lot of topics. But like mirror neurons like start to relate more with other people's mirror neurons like the more you hang out together. So like your neurons will actually be like, oh, hello, I see that your significant other mirror neurons are here. Let us empathize with each other.
So it's so cool. It's super weird.
Yeah.
Definitely want to make sure to, let's see, other questions. Okay, so Santiago Arauz. I talk to Santiago all the time, and I just now realized that I don't know how to say their last name. Okay, anyway, based on your experience, how important has empathy been in grad school? So I guess this kind of goes in two directions, right? There's the one of in your research, but the other part, you've had a lot of experiences in grad school. Is there anything that stands out in your mind about about the empathy. It sounds like part of the reason that you got into this stuff is from a deeper place of passion.
Yeah, I think empathy is huge. From a research standpoint, I'm seeing that the more empathy that advisors have for their graduate students, the better the outcomes for the graduate students are. There's like one statistic that in some paper that basically they had a measure of like how heard you felt by your advisor. And for every like decrement in unit of how heard you felt, your well-being stat also went down by like 40%. So
Wow.
that was a big statistic for me. I was like, that's a lot of decrement for like that being heard and active listening aspects. On a more personal level, I mean, the more empathetic the people on my committee and the people who have been my mentors have been with me, the better I've succeeded, like not only professionally, but personally as well.
Yeah.
The more people in places of power that I had who I thought were there for me and supported me, the better I was doing. And I've seen it happen for other graduate students as well. And I've seen it happen the opposite way for other graduate students as well, where they have no support system with any kind of power. And so they feel like they are failing.
Right. Right. Well, and I mean, I've certainly had that same situation. And I think a lot of times people mistake empathy and kindness, right? But I've had I've had some people who are very kind, but they certainly didn't listen to my questions, nor did they try to put themselves in my situation to understand more of where I was coming from. It was very quickly judgmental, not in necessarily a bad way, but just deciding what is the best course of action rather than what sort of situation is this person in, despite them being very kind. And I've also had people who are really empathetic. The person who comes to mind actually is my committee chair. He is not like a soft, cuddly person. He is a kind person, but he doesn't come across, you're not somebody you're going to walk in and think you're going to a counselor, right? And he, though, is so empathetic that anytime I've come to him and just been freaking out or been nervous or been really excited, he pretty calmly asks me more questions. And he clearly is tuned into those things. And it's really, really interesting to me to hear that empathy quotient and the feelings of being heard, of being understood, are so deeply tied to graduate students' feeling of wellness. That 2008 study from the Council of Graduate Schools showed that the biggest relationship between dropping out or attrition from a grad program and anything else was that person's reported relationship with their advisor. And I just, I hope that all of this goes towards the opportunities of graduate students being more successful, but also of professors seeing empathy as a means to also drive productivity. So, so cool.
Yeah, and I think if nothing else, if we're able to have advisors see that like their labs are going to be more productive when their students are taken care of, like that could be a huge driver for getting the lab cultures to
Mm-hmm.
change. I don't want that to be the reason, but the research supports it.
Yeah, yeah. And at the end of the day, I mean, all of this is talking about how to support different types of people based on their needs and their learning styles and all these different things. And there's something to be said too of supporting, supporting the advisors too, of saying, you know what, your empathy score isn't super high. I'll say it. I don't think I've never taken this empathy quiz, and so I want to. I don't consider myself a very empathetic person. It's something I work really hard to be empathetic, and but it's actually helped me to do a lot of the PhD balance stuff, where other people read through these stories and have a really strong emotional response, whereas I read through them, and I'm just really honored that people will share it, and I want to know more about it, and I want to try to support them. But it's not like a natural gut response that I know a lot of people get. So I do hope that other people, find this interesting. Your work is super cool. I'm sure that getting to this point has been difficult, but I'm really glad you're in this field. You're doing really important stuff.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's a cool field to be in, and it's growing. And I hope that eventually we can help put protocols in place to make graduate school better for everyone.
Yeah. So this is the question that I always wrap up with people, which is, what are you Googling right now related to this topic? You know, what are you interested in? It could be within your research. It could just be general stuff of, you know, what, when you're laying around thinking about it, what are you asking the internet or asking friends about?
Ooh.
You know,
Um, I think like mostly I'm asking friends what their experiences in grad school are. Being on the PhD Balance team, I get to read all the stories that come in as we post them. So that's been really interesting. And that's something that I definitely turn to a lot as I'm Googling. The other thing that I would say I'm looking at right now, if I can actually pull out the book right now, I
woo,
feel like I'm super
look at you
prepared.
go. Props.
Um, I know. There is this great book that I am going to start reading right now called Athena
Oh,
Rising: How and Why Men Should Mentor
oh,
Women
I need that.
by a guy named Brad Johnson, and he's out of the Naval
Mm,
Academy. Um,
interesting.
and I heard him talk. I know, like, such an interesting place to come out of. Um, but yeah, I heard him talk, and it's a really great commentary on how to support women in your workplace, and how to start flipping the narrative on, the hallways of old white men portraits for businesses. So,
Yeah, and does
yeah.
that kind of relate to the empathy side? Is Do you know if there's anything related to it? Probably.
Oh yeah. There's a lot related to it. I mean, basically the whole point is as long as you're being an empathetic man towards your fellow women, you're gonna succeed.
Nice.
And I think that that's true in a lot of places. So
That bar is always really low. But, you know,
yeah.
it's good to have those tangible things. Well, Liesl, it has been amazing. I'm going to let you get back to your research because we need like 7 of you working on this. So, what's the best place for people to reach you? Are you open to people asking questions, things like that?
Oh yeah, please feel free to ask me questions. I am honestly always on Twitter, so if you ask me questions on there, then I get to see the answers for the rest of the world as well. I'm Sauerkraus94,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
reach out.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, you're actually always on Twitter because I force you to be there. Well, thanks again, Liesl. You take care, and I will talk to you soon. I am expecting a bunch more questions because this was great.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me
You're so
on.
welcome. Okay, everyone, that is it for this episode. Liesl was awesome. I love talking about these totally different topics. If you have science you want to talk about, if you know somebody who has science that they want to talk about, that can be social science, it could be historical research. I think the definition of science is pretty big. But either way, reach out to me. Let's see if I can do this. Heh. Got it. Reach out to me on Twitter or social media on Instagram. Pop some messages down in the comments. Like and subscribe so you don't miss anything. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Be empathetic. Most importantly, be empathetic to you because I find that that is the most difficult. See you later.